Food intake and energy expenditure are inherently connected, and together they form the foundation of energy balance. Before we dive deeper into the realm of nutrition science, we should first take a look at the basic components that determine how much energy you need to maintain your body. When discussing nutrition and energy expenditure, we often talk about kilocalories. But what exactly does that mean? 1 calorie is the heat required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. Because this is a very small unit of measurement for humans, we almost exclusively use kilocalories, which constitutes 1000 calories. As a reference, the daily amount of energy used by an average person could warm up about 8 tubs full of water by 1 degree Celsius. I'd like you all to meet Nian, my aggressively average friend. Nian leads a moderately active life and uses about 2500 kilocalories per day in total. Between 60 to 70% of his energy expenditure is devoted to all processes that are necessary to keep his body in operation. We have 2 ways of looking at this, the basal metabolic rate, or BMR, and the resting metabolic rate, or RMR. The basal metabolic rate is the absolute lowest metabolic expenditure possible for an individual, and it's measured right after 8 hours of sleep in complete rest with an empty digestive system. Resting metabolic rate essentially means the same thing, but under much less restrictive conditions. For example, you don't have to measure directly after sleeping, which means that the person in question doesn't have to stay overnight at the research facility. The two are quite similar and generally differ by no more than 10%, but it's an important distinction to make, even if the 2 terms are often used interchangeably. To keep it simple, I will refer to the basal metabolic rate for the remainder of this video. This basic expenditure depends on many factors. It declines with age, increases with weight and height, and is influenced much more by lean body mass than fat mass. It is also often higher in men than women, and both genetics and environmental factors can either reduce or increase it. Notably, starvation diets can actually reduce your basal metabolic rate by up to 30%, and certain diseases can even increase it 2-fold. It follows that the basal metabolic rate can vary greatly between individuals, but it's almost always the largest portion of energy expenditure. It serves to keep your cellular membranes functioning, to provide your brain with energy and waste removal, and to maintain the processes in organs such as your heart, but also in muscles and fat tissue. The next part of Nian's energy expenditure is the thermic effect of food, also known as diet-induced thermogenesis. This is the expenditure above the basal metabolic rate due to food intake, which includes energy used for digestion, absorption, transport, and storage. Lean individuals generally have a much higher thermic effect of food than obese individuals during rest, but also during and after exercise. And finally, the largest contributor is the meal composition. Carbohydrates and fats are relatively easily processed by the body, but proteins have a much stronger effect on energy expenditure due to their metabolism pathways. The final piece of the puzzle is physical activity energy expenditure. This can be divided into 2 separate categories: exercise activity thermogenesis and non-exercise activity thermogenesis. The latter describes all normal activities during the day, such as walking to the train station, lifting your arm to take a sip of your drink, or even simply standing on your feet. Actual planned exercise is normally much more intense, but because we do that occasionally, it usually contributes less to your total expenditure than non-exercise activities. This means that consistently taking the stairs instead of an elevator, or walking somewhere instead of driving, can actually play a meaningful part in increasing your energy usage during the day. But that's not the only reason why physical activity is so important. It reduces the risk of all-cause mortality, high blood pressure, cancer, diabetes, osteoporosis, and just general functional capabilities. Simply moving more is one of the easiest to achieve and best ways of improving your health, now and in the future. You can probably imagine that it's very difficult to accurately measure energy expenditure in humans. In research, the most often used techniques require expensive equipment and quite invasive maneuvers, For example, some methods measure oxygen and carbon dioxide in the air that you breathe. From that, we can calculate how much energy you actually use. Another method requires you to ingest something called doubly labeled water that can measure the kinetics of water turnover in the body for a longer period of time. Although it's one of the best methods available, it's very expensive and in no way a viable option for consumers. Instead, we have to work with what we call prediction formulas. We don't have a simple way to measure the thermic effect of food, so we are limited to using the basal metabolic rate and physical activity. Your basal metabolic rate can be estimated using characteristics such as weight, height, age, body composition, and gender. There's a number of formulas available that yield slightly different results, and it depends on the situation which one is most appropriate. When we have an idea of what the basal metabolic rate is, we can combine that with a physical activity level multiplier to estimate total expenditure. The physical activity level can range from about 1.2, which equals complete bed rest, to about 2.2, which is only reached by expert athletes or those with incredibly physically demanding jobs. Of course, there are exceptions, but this is the basic range that we're dealing with. For the modern lifestyle with a desk job, it's almost impossible to reach a physical activity level over 2, simply because we spend most of our time sitting down. Let's say that Nian has a physical activity level of 1.6, which is equal to a moderately active lifestyle. He's not a very athletic guy, but he's also not a complete couch potato. He calculated his basal metabolic rate to be about 1560 kilocalories per day, and by multiplying that with his physical activity level, he estimates his total energy expenditure to be approximately 2500 kilocalories per day. Unfortunately, this method is not known for its accuracy on an individual level. It appears to work well for large populations, but due to the many factors that influence energy expenditure, the inter-individual differences can be quite large. Nevertheless, it provides a good starting point for estimating how much energy you burn on a daily basis, and, by extension, how much food you would need to match that. Speaking of food, next episode will be focusing on nutrient absorption. We'll follow one of Nian's meals from the moment he takes his first bite through his entire gastrointestinal tract. See you then!